Okay, this video is about human nature and virtue ethics and what this question is all about, because a few people have just asked me to explain it a little bit more. So this question comes from the idea that all virtue ethics theories basically have an idea of what the ideal human is, what the ideal human nature is. And each theory has a slightly different idea of what that nature is, has a slightly different idea of how you get there to become that type of person, and a slightly different idea of the reason for becoming that type of person. So, if we were to think about Aristotle, Foote and MacIntyre, and we were thinking about the kind of ideal nature or ideal human character, then if we were to just think about that person, what would that person look like? Well, for these three, what they have in common, that this person would be just, this person would be honest, and this person would have courage. And for them, this person here is the ideal person. And so, depending on which theory you are looking at, if it's Aristotle, Foote or MacIntyre, they all have an idea of what the ideal human nature is. It's just that they're all slightly different. And so their theories are telling you what that ideal human nature looks like and how you get there. And that's really what virtue ethics is all about. This is what the ideal human nature is, and here is how you get there. So for Aristotle, for example, that's developing the 12 moral virtues through using the golden mean. So there is an ideal human nature, and this is how you get there. That's what virtue ethics is. Now, each different theory is really based on the assumption that we all agree that there is an ideal human nature. And what each theorist is trying to do is to get you to agree with them that the ideal human nature that they're suggesting is the right one. But the question is, do we actually all agree that there is an ideal human nature? Perhaps there isn't. Perhaps it's unrealistic to think that there is an ideal human nature. Perhaps there just isn't an ideal human character. And so in the exam you might get a question which says something like, there is no ideal human nature, do you agree? And so really what you're thinking about there is what would our different virtue ethicists think and what are the arguments against that? The next question within this kind of topic area is actually, do we agree that the list of virtues that the different theorists provide for us to indicate what a virtuous ideal person is, do we actually agree on the list of virtues that they give us? So that's something else that you could get asked, is do we actually agree on the list of virtues that we give, or are some virtues more important than others, and so on. So along with an assumption that we agree that there's an ideal human nature, along with the assumption that we agree of what virtues go into that ideal human nature, there's also an assumption from virtue ethicists that we agree on the reason for becoming virtuous. So for Aristotle and Foote, that's to reach eudaimonia. For MacIntyre, that's so that your community can prosper and become a better functioning community. So there is an assumption there that we agree that an ideal human character, an ideal human nature, is one that wants to seek those goals as well. So for Aristotle, for example, the ideal human nature involves wanting to reach eudaimonia and wanting your community to reach eudaimonia. But who's to say that we actually agree with that? What if we don't agree that the ultimate goal of us all and for our community is to reach eudaimonia? What if we think that the goal of becoming virtuous is something else? So finally then, within this topic area, you might also ask, do we actually all agree with how to become that ideal human nature, that ideal virtuous person? And again, each theorist gives a slightly different idea of how we actually become that virtuous, ideal human nature. And so you might get a question saying, I don't know, do you the only way to virtue is through the golden mean. Do you agree? Or something along those lines. So just to summarise then, this question to do with human nature and virtue ethics, it's based on the idea that each of our virtue ethicists here, Aristotle, Fuss and MacIntyre, they all have a picture in their head of what the ideal human nature looks like. And so the questions in the exam might be something to do with whether or not we agree with that there is an ideal human nature. It might be, do we actually all agree with the list of virtues that ideal human nature has according to the different ethicists? It might be to do with, do we all agree on the goal that the ideal human nature, that ideal human character, human person would seek? And do we all agree on how we actually develop into that ideal human nature?